Jack, who's a theist from Canada. And Jack wants to talk about the ontological argument with different points. I don't know what that means. Jack, hello.
I don't know what that means either.
Hello, my name is Jack, and I'm going to... First of all, what do you know about the ontological argument?
Well, I'd rather you describe it for our audience, and you know, especially if you've got one with a twist on it, as it seems to be. Give us your rundown of the ontological argument.
Okay, okay. How am I going to say this? God is defined as a being that no greater being should be conceived. But if he were to be real, he would be even greater, because obviously something that is real is more impactful than something that isn't, correct?
Just say that again.
If something is real, it has more impact than something that is not.
Not necessarily. Ideas aren't necessarily real, but they have great impact.
Okay, they are.
What do you mean by real? I guess. What do you mean by real?
Even the internet itself isn't real. It's very
real.
It's just in an abstract sense.
No, the internet is a real fucking thing. There are wires and cables.
Some abstract things, yeah. Let's not confuse things that are abstract with not being real.
It's not something you can pick up with your hands. You can pick up a computer, but not the internet.
Well, you could if your hand was big enough, and delicate enough. So what do you mean by real? Do you mean by something you can actually physically touch in the world? Is that what you mean by real?
If God were real, he would be greater. Whether he's abstract or not, it doesn't matter. If he were real, he would be greater. And since we can conceive of a God that is real, and that means he has to be real, otherwise he wouldn't really be the greatest thing.
Yeah, I'm not following that. That logic doesn't. I'm
not following it either, and I'd rather you not kind of skip past the question Aaron asked you. Do you mean something? Because what is real is a very important question, especially in this kind of case where we're having this conversation. Do you mean? Do you consider things that are real only physical objects, or do you consider them? Do you consider the larger sphere of reality, as I would state it, as real, which includes abstract concepts which we can demonstrate are true?
Okay. But what I'm trying to say here is, can you imagine God existing?
I'd rather you answer the question, sir, to be honest with you. What do you consider reality to be? It's a very important question in regards to, this conversation. So rather than skipping over the question, I'd rather you actually answer the question.
What do I consider reality? I consider reality to be everything around us, in a sense. I mean, that's all I can say. If it exists, it's real. I don't really know what else to say.
Okay, so if you can touch it, it's real, and if we can think it, it's real. But we can think things. I can think of a pink unicorn outside my window, and it's not real. I can look out my window right now and say, nope, there's no pink unicorns, even though I'm thinking it. So.
The unicorn itself is not real, but your thought of one is.
Yes, my thought about it is correct. So you're saying what's real is things we can touch and things we can think, and our actual thoughts are real.
Yeah.
Okay. So now take us through step by step on. So if we can think that God exists, so the thought of God is real. So you're saying the thought of God is real, therefore God is real?
No, I'm saying because God is, by this definition, the greatest being around, and he would be even greater if he were real. And
but you've not defined God. All you've done is said God.
We're saying God is the greatest thing.
What are you defining as God? What are the properties that you're giving for this God? Because you can't just say, well, I define God as the greatest being, because that doesn't list any properties. I can tell you, sir, after certain meals, I can do farts, which are pretty great beings. So that's, you know, that God would have to be pretty impressive to be greater than one of those. You know, what are the properties of this God? You know, so I need the properties to understand how I'm assessing how great this thing is. I can't, as David Hume would say, and I'm doing what I told the last caller not to do, as David Hume would say, you know, we can only kind of envision things to exist as if we understand those attributes to begin with. I'm paraphrasing. You know, we can't just pluck something out of the air that we've never had any experience of whatsoever. This is called, you know, in regards to the self, this was Hume's bundle theory of the self. So we need to understand the kind of attributes that this God possesses before we can decide whether it's the greatest thing possible. I can imagine some pretty great things.
He's great in the sense that we cannot conceive all of him. Kind of like it's trying to describe the properties of dark matter. I'm sure you've heard of that. I mean, describing the properties of God is similar in a sense.
Oh, so God is like dark matter. God is equal to dark matter.
He's not dark matter. Trying to describe him is like trying to describe dark matter.
So if you can't describe him, if you do not understand, you know, the very concept you're trying to ascribe as the greatest being, how can you say it's the greatest being? If it's only partially available to you, how do you know that the part that's not available to you is great? It might seem that, you know, like every cloud has a silver lining. You might see the silver lining of God and think, fucking hell, that's impressive. I think that's pretty darn great. And then when you get past the silver lining, you think, actually, the rest of it's a bit shit. So how do you know if you've only got a partial understanding of something, that the rest of that thing is actually the greatest thing?
Because, I mean, we don't have 100% factual stuff on everything. But
I agree.
I agree.
Say whether or not something's pretty great or not.
I agree. But how can you then, if you by your own admission know that you can't fully give a description of this thing, that you can't fully understand it, how can you then say, well, it's the greatest thing? And I'm sure, just to kind of put this into perspective from a philosophical point of view, I'm sure
faith comes into play.
Okay, but that's not an argument for something being the greatest thing because you're employing faith on it. And I'm sure, and I might have got this wrong, so people please correct me if I do, because I want to be corrected if I'm wrong. I'm sure Anselm was the first person who came up with the ontological argument, or the first version of the ontological argument, who was around in the 11th century. I'm sure he actually came back and said, actually, I don't think, you know, we can define God as the greatest thing because we cannot fully define God. I'm sure he said that later. Please correct me, people, if I'm wrong. But I think it's very interesting that, you know, the person, if that is correct, if the person who first came up with this argument later actually thought about it later and said, you know, actually, we can't define God. We can't define God as the greatest being because we cannot define God. We do not have full understanding of God. So how can you define it? Your argument seems to be, well, it seems a bit good. But, you know, there are lots of celebrities who seemed very good throughout history, who've then later on to be found to be like traffickers and child abusers behind the scenes when we find out a little bit more about them. So if you, by your own admission, cannot say with definitive certainty, this being, all of this being, is perfect, is the greatest being, how can you then say, well, I know for a fact I'm making an argument for this, because you do not have that information by your own admission?
I mean, there's enough evidence out there as that can tell if that can like show his greatness. I mean, look how big the universe is supposed to be. If someone were to create our entire universe, that'd be the greatest thing by default.
Yeah, so now you're making a logical leap. You're saying the universe is big, therefore somebody created the big universe, they must be great. Well, you have to, there's a leap there from the universe is big to somebody created it. Do you see that? That there's a leap there? You have to demonstrate, even though the universe is big, doesn't also mean that somebody created it. Those are two different claims, so to speak. And so just because it's big doesn't mean it was created. So you have to demonstrate the universe was created to demonstrate that there's a creator. Does that make sense?
I'm not going to jump into the cosmological argument because I want to stay on topic. But, I mean, as a theist, I believe, it was created by a God.
Okay. So what do you want to get back on track with? That God there's a great God. He's the greatest, therefore he exists. That's what it seems like. I still haven't heard an argument other than God is the greatest thing, therefore he exists. Or it exists.
Along the lines of, if we can conceive of a God that doesn't exist, and we can conceive of one that does, which one is greater? Which one is a better God?
I can conceive of lots of gods that exist.
Yeah, there's thousands of gods that people have conceived of.
My field of study is religion, philosophy, and ethics. My particular kind of area of expertise is Buddhism. And contrary to a lot of popular belief, there are gods within Buddhism. There are gods within Hinduism. There's a God in Islam, which is, and again, contrary to popular belief, different to the Christian God. There are gods in the early Canaanite traditions. There are gods in the Egyptian traditions. We have many, many different gods proposed. So just conceiving of a God neither says that it exists to begin with, nor tells us how great that being is.
And if it's as great as possible, like, you can't get any greater than that.
Yeah, but you're just saying shit now.
Greater.
Yeah, that doesn't tell us anything about. That's not an argument for a particular God. Just saying the greatest possible. But you've also said that you cannot know everything about this God. If you cannot know everything about this God, you cannot, by definition, state that it is the greatest possible thing you can conceive of, because there are things about it you don't know. And those things might be contrary to the things that you do know. Even if you conceive, everything you conceive about this God might be absolutely perfect in your mind. But if you're saying there are things I don't know about it, you cannot say that that God is the greatest thing you can conceive, because by your own admission, there are things you do not know about it. You do not know that those things are not contrary to the thing that you can conceive.
Well, you got me there. I guess I can't I can't think of things that I don't know about.
No, Jack, and look, and I don't want to sound like I'm beating up on you. I've actually appreciated this call a lot, and I very, very much appreciate that stance. I'd like to talk to you further. I'm going to let you go shortly because we do have other callers. But before you go, I do want to say to you, go back and have a think about it. Because you're a great caller. You're very honest. You're very willing to explore things together, and to say, actually, just as I did earlier on when I talked about whoever it was I talked about, Anselm, I think it was, and and I said I might be wrong on this. Being open to being wrong or being open to not knowing is a really, really great quality to have. It really, really is. So I very much appreciate you for that. I am going to let you go. Have a think about it and give us a call back, and let's talk on this further, because it is for me, it's been a really interesting call, Aaron.
No, I appreciated that he admitted that maybe at the end there that he admitted maybe he was wrong. and that maybe we kind of got him. I just don't see the leap. I was having a hard time following that we conceive of a great God, we can conceive of a lower God, therefore God exists. I think there's a logical leap there that's going on. Just because we can conceive of something doesn't mean it necessarily exists. We have to go out into the world and find evidence for those things.